Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me once again as we look to the horizon. And today we are back with another fiction project update for today's vlog. I made it to page 54 of Burning Bright. And that's pretty good progress because that means I got 14 pages done this week. That's about 2 per day for those of you who are keeping score. And I feel pretty good about that. That's more than I expected to get done. It puts me a little bit ahead of the curve. But for this week's goal, I want to try and get to page 70. That will put me well past the halfway point. Now that I've gotten closer to it, I think the halfway point is going to be page 60. And that means that I can finish this if I stay at the pace I'm going in 4 or 5 weeks, about a month. That's pretty good. That will mean I finish this project about the time I wrap up Night Train to Hardwick, which is very satisfying. Now, things have been going pretty smoothly from this point forward, and now that I have written more, I am confident that things are going to unfold to make the story about 120 pages. I am very rapidly approaching the envisioned halfway point of the story, and that means I really think I have everything plotted out. The end of my stories, as I've said before, tend to go a lot more smoothly and evenly than the beginning because I have worked out all of the questions I had about getting to the ending as I get towards the middle. That lets me then focus on setting up and knocking out all of those things that I struggled with in the beginning. And I am hopeful that this will not be any different. The writing process for the whole project has been different, though, so we'll see. We'll see. Now, that said, I have been doing things besides this week. Only a little bit, because I was quite busy with this week, but I have taken on some test reading of my own. I have been offering feedback and revisions to a couple of other authors I work with and who are people I trust to do feedback and revisions on my own work. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that go into offering feedback as an author to another author. And these are very general things, admittedly. They are things that are important to keep in mind, but they are not kinds of feedback, really. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just dive into it. The first thing to keep in mind is that this is not your project, so you should try and figure out what the person you're communicating with is trying to do with their project before you offer feedback. That way you're not offering them a whole bunch of feedback that's not of any use to them. You don't talk a whole lot about action beats that should go in a suspense story. They don't really have a whole lot of those, except at the very end. And if you're saying, well, you're a third of your way through the story and you haven't had a serious action beat yet, that may be okay because they're trying to build suspense and atmosphere. And you may say, instead, how can you make the pace better? Maybe you could switch back and forth between different scenes at a higher, more frequently instead of just doing it every couple of pages. You could do it every page or every half a page to keep that sense of tension building without necessarily having to add an extraneous action scene. So keep in mind what the person you're giving feedback to is trying to accomplish with the work they are working on. By the same token, if you're dealing with someone who is writing a nonfiction book or especially some kind of instructional work, give them feedback on what you did and did not follow intuitively. So if they mention, say, a tool that you will need, and they don't tell you what it looks like or something like that, you may want to mention that your feedback needs to be more about the thrust of your the writer's vision than it would be about how you would do it. So if you don't really approve of an author's word choice or how they are structuring their prose or things like that, maybe mention it, but don't suggest revisions. Just suggest that you find a thing clunky. You're not trying to horn in on their style or anything like that. You're just trying to tell them what's not working for you. You're not the writer in this case. You are the audience. And then those are two different groups of people with different interests and different things to bring to the table. Another thing to keep in mind as you are offering feedback is that you want to be practical. Don't suggest a fix that requires your friend to go back and rewrite everything from the ground up. There's a more simple fix, like maybe changing a couple of lines of dialogue in a scene before. Now, if there is something that requires a complete restructuring from the ground up, and you can't think of any other way to go about it, by all means do so. But don't offer that kind of feedback if that's the kind of thing that would just make the story more to your tastes. Admittedly, if you have these different kinds of tastes to the person who's asking for your feedback, you may suggest to that person you're not the right person to give that feedback. I've never had to do that before. My tastes are pretty well known among the people who have read my stuff and the people I collaborate with. So, yeah, I've never really had to dig too deep into that. But especially if you are part of, say, a writers group on the internet and you don't know these people very well, be cautious in that respect. Another thing to keep in mind when you're offering feedback is that less is more. And by that, I literally mean you can offer more feedback if you keep each point brief. If you see bad prose repeatedly, it is better to briefly mention it each time and let your author try and figure out how they want to rework that prose, then suggest a way for your author to rework one bit of bad prose and then do that every time going down. Oftentimes, your author will come up with a workaround that is better and more suited to their own work if you just point it out to them and they start to draw a through line through all those data points. And in general, because of the differences in writing styles, unless you are collaborating with this other author or you have collaborated a great deal in the past, the solution they come up with is going to fit much more organically with less work into the story they have built than you're trying to offer a bunch of revisions and have your author try and have to rework all of them to fit their prose style. So those are just some things to keep in mind while you're offering feedback. And of course, there are the obvious things. Try and point out concrete things, make suggestions for how to fix it. If you have any really good ideas. If you don't have any good ideas, that's fine too. Just telling an author that something is clunky is useful feedback. And they will try and find a way to smooth that out. Because of a lot of times when there is clunky dialogue in these first or second passes, the author was really just trying to get everything down and then make a rough pass for revision, and they haven't read everything with a fine-tooth comb. A lot of times you have to actually wait a while to let a story kind of flush itself from your mind so you can come back with fresh eyes and reread it. So that kind of feedback, just saying, oh, that looks really rough. Yeah, by the time they actually get your feedback, they're probably going to have been done with that story for long enough. They're going to go back and look at what you're talking about and say, oh yeah, that is really rough. I should have done that another way. So all around, it's better to be very brief but very specific than broad and general. And another thing about feedback is a lot of people feel like they have to be delicate with it. And that may be true, especially if you're dealing with an amateur or a person who is working on their first one or two fiction projects. But if you're dealing with a person who has been on the internet doing web fiction like I do for a while, or who has really been to any writing school or writing seminar, they are probably used to very strong and very harsh criticism, because that's just part of how the industry operates, and it's how you have to you just kind of have to roll with the punches there in order to get out the product you want to get out. And you really start to crave that kind of very blunt, very specific, very pointed feedback because you start to see how it makes you better and makes your stories better. So never be afraid of offering that feedback. Always put that on the table. Even if you are dealing with one of these very green writers who doesn't like it very much, it's better that they get it quickly and they start getting used to it than to try and spare their feelings. Honestly, storytelling is not a game for people who are very sensitive because you're going to get all kinds of feedback for your entire career. People have loathed Stephen King since he published his first book. I guarantee it. He has been getting harsh feedback all his life. That hasn't stopped him from being one of the most successful authors to ever live. So don't be afraid of that feedback. It may be what somebody needs to become the next Stephen King. Probably not, but it may be. It may be. It's worth thinking about. Anyways, that's all I've got for you on the subject of feedback and on the subject of writing. Because these things I am giving feedback on aren't my projects. I don't feel comfortable talking about them here, other than to say that they both were very interesting. And once they have undergone a couple of revisions, they look like they will be quite good. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. There's a like button, a subscribe button down below. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.